Hello, friends. Last year, I was 53 years old, and I finally finished my college degree. I got a degree in psychology. Now, why psychology, you might ask? The main purpose was so that we could have this conversation. Because I've been trying to figure out how to address a Bible topic with friends of mine and family members in a way that will allow you to give some time and reflection on the subject. So if you're a friend of mine and you're not really interested in the Bible, this is probably where you should go. If you're curious, stick around. It was nice to see you. I'm still alive, still happy. I'll talk to you soon. To my other friends that are, going to church or they enjoy the Bible, I would challenge you to listen and let's have a discussion about psychology, the Bible, learning. In psychology, I learned a lot of things, but one of the things they teach you is child development. It's funny because my children are grown, and here I am learning about child development, and I see some missed opportunities that I had with them, and that's unfortunate. It's kind of backwards, but the concepts of learning are important when we are studying the Bible. So as a child, we first learn to mimic. And, whether you're a baby growing up in church or an adult that goes to church for the first time, a lot of times the first thing you do is mimic what you're hearing or mimic the actions that you're seeing. And I did that as a child. I learned how to quote the books of the Bible when I was 2 years old. So I mimicked my parents. Then I learned to play. We sing songs. We play games in Sunday school. We do some arts and crafts. We have youth rallies where we play Bible games, sword drills. And that helps us learn the Bible in a playful way. After that, we graduate to a point where we understand the rules, or we know that there's rules. In kindergarten, you see a rule board on the wall. That's one of the first things you see, that they're going to enforce rules. Your parents teach you rules. The church is teaching, a bunch of rules from the Bible. And you learn from that to grow into a point where you're accountable for your morality. And once you reach that age of accountability, then you're able to make a decision with what's right and wrong. And if you do something wrong, you're doing something wrong. Now, after that, as you grow, and usually this is closer to adulthood, it's true about teenagers too, but exploration is vital in growth when it comes to psychology. So where you have to take what you've learned and recreate it, take what you've learned and explore it so that you know for yourself that what you've been taught is true. The subject I'd like to introduce and explore with you is the return of Christ, because it's a hot topic subject, something I've heard my whole life. It's something that I'm interested in. There was a post on Facebook in 2016 or so from somebody that I know in church. I'll just keep you anonymous right now. It said something to the effect that the Catholic Church admits that the return of Christ is not going to happen. And I remember reading that title. I didn't click on it and read the whole article, but I already had a sour taste about the Catholic Church from my upbringing. And that just seemed ridiculous to me, that anybody that claims to study the Bible could say that Jesus is not going to return. So I don't know if you saw that post. You've probably heard that. I've spent the last 7 years studying the return of Christ and studying the book of Revelation, studying the New Testament, studying the Old Testament about this subject. And as I explored it, I became a little bit angry because there's facts in the Bible that don't line up with everything I've been taught. And I've heard thousands of messages. I've heard some really good messages. I've listened to thousands of songs about the return of Christ. And some of those are my favorite songs. I like to look at the Bible as a tapestry or a piece of art. And when I was growing up, it was an uncompleted piece of art because we had clues as to what was going to happen at the end of the book. But it hasn't really come to pass yet. So we'll understand what that artwork looks like down the road. In the last 7 years or so, as I've been studying the Bible, and it's been a lot of hours, as I've been studying the subject of the return of Christ, I'm starting to see that the tapestry really has been completed, much like the work of the Messiah was completed. It was finished. It's very powerful. It's very hard to disagree with now that I've studied thoroughly. And that doesn't mean I'm aligning myself with the Catholic Church, because I don't believe what they believe. I do have a mountain of clues that I want to share with you about this subject, because when we find a subject that is contrary to what we've been taught, or what my dad said, or what my grandpa said, it's easy to dismiss it. But when there's evidence, it's pretty difficult to ignore evidence. So this isn't a lot of opinion. I just want to present evidence to you that I've found in the last 7 years. And hopefully you can study it yourself and connect some dots yourself, or just reassure yourself of your current position. Worst case, we all study a little bit more. Hopefully the clues that we find will be eye-opening to you, because I think there's a lot of power, and God is very complex, and we don't understand everything that God has done. And so today I just want to talk about one clue. This is the first clue out of hundreds. In John chapter 21, I've heard a lot of messages about how Jesus has risen from the grave. He's already been crucified, and he appears to John and Peter, and he talks to Peter about feeding his sheep, feeding his lambs. He repeats himself 3 times. Do you love me, Peter? Do you love me? Then feed my sheep. And the 3rd time he asked him, it made Peter sad. Of course, Peter denied Christ 3 times. And he said, you know that I love you. And that's basically all the messages I've heard out of the book of John chapter 21. So I don't have a question about that. What I'd like to address is John 21:21 through the end of the chapter. That's only like 5 verses. But it's where Jesus basically tells Peter that he's going to die, a martyr's death, much like he did himself. And then he tells John that he's going to tarry until he comes again. Peter, he didn't understand why John didn't have to die. In fact, Peter interprets what Jesus said as John was not going to die. And then John, he clarifies for us about what Jesus said. Jesus didn't say I wasn't going to die, but Jesus said I was going to tarry until he came. So what does that mean? How is that important? If the return of Christ is in our future, I'm in 2024 right now. If it's in our future, is John, the Apostle John, still alive, tarrying until Christ returns? Is John literally 2,025 years old? Is John still walking the earth? Is he immortal? I don't believe that. I think that John lived until Christ returned, just like the Bible says. Jesus said, he's going to tarry until I come. And I believe that when Jesus returned, as is described in the New Testament, that John was alive. Now, what do you believe? Because we can't ignore those verses, just like we can't ignore evidence when somebody says, well, you have to be baptized to be saved, because these verses say something to that effect. Most of us default to evidence of the thief on the cross, where he says, today you'll be with me in paradise. Jesus says that to him. And we say, well, the thief wasn't taken off the cross and baptized, and yet he was still able to go to heaven, paradise. That one piece of evidence makes it difficult for a lot of us to believe that you have to be baptized to go to heaven. Now, there's other people that still believe that. But what do we do with this verse where Jesus says that John is going to still be alive when he returns? To me, I just take it at face value. I've talked to this with my pastor. I've talked about the return of Christ with my deacons. I've talked about the return of Christ with my Sunday school teacher, who's very good. I've talked about the return of Christ with my mentor, with my friends, with some of my family. My mentor, I talked to him for about 2 hours. He listened to me. I presented a lot of evidence, a lot more than this one piece, and I'll share the others with you in short videos. But he hung up the phone, and he called me the next day, and he says, I've been thinking about what you said, and I think what you're saying is basically you're taking the Bible exactly at face value. And I appreciated the fact that that was the conclusion he came to, because that's all I'm trying to do. What does the Bible say? It doesn't matter what my opinion is or what your opinion is. What does it say? And do we believe it? And is it possible that it's deeper than our understanding? I know that it is. The Bible's very deep in knowledge. There's so many things that we'll never be able to understand, but boy, Christ sure did go out of his way, and Paul went out of his way to teach about the return of Christ, because he wanted us to understand the mystery. I believe that that's taken place. I know that sounds like I'm a lunatic, but I've studied it for 7 years. I don't think it changes a whole lot. I think we all need relationship with God. But this one doctrine of the return of Christ, I think, has been misrepresented from our recent ancestors, guys like Bogart, who wrote the Baptist Way book. I understand why, and I can explain why they would come up with that ideology. I believe that they're very kind and loving people. But I think it's time for us to push back and look at this information for what it says. So I believe that I believe this is prophecy. It's inspired by the Holy Spirit. Every word is true. Jesus told John that he would be alive when he returned. That's okay with me. I don't understand how that is, because as a child I was taught that's all in our future. But John's future, Peter's future, Paul's future doesn't necessarily have to be my future. It could be my past, and it can still be powerful and just create a tapestry for us that shows a completed, beautiful work that God did to allow us to have access to him again with close relationship. It's very powerful. That's one piece of the puzzle. I know you might want to debate this subject. I'm not afraid to debate. That is not my goal. My goal is to share and help people that I love and care about connect dots in the Bible and explore for themselves, what is the powerful word saying? Is it true? Did they get it wrong? Were they mistaken? I don't believe so. So what is the power behind it? That's what I'm exploring. I don't really want to debate. I'm willing to come speak. I'm willing to answer questions. I'm willing to debate. If we can learn, and if it's not full of anger. David answered the challenge from Goliath, and he said, I've got the stones. I've got the stones. And I believe I have the evidence that can help connect a lot of dots from the book of Daniel to the book of Revelations, from the book of Thessalonians to the book of John. I think it's a beautiful, completed work that we can see. And I would offer you to come along with me on the journey as we explore some of these facts that a lot of times we just ignore. I've never heard anybody preach from John 21 through 25. I've never heard it. I've heard a lot of messages about the end times. And there's some very cool facts. I hope you'll listen, and I appreciate your time.